Australia begins to enforce a ban on social media accounts for users under 16 years of age. How is this rule expected to work? Could it be brought to the United States, as one potential 2028 presidential candidate is already calling for Washington to follow suit?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial pages, Kim Strassel and editorial board member Colin Levy. News reports say that hundreds of thousands of user accounts were deactivated this week after Australia began to enforce a law passed last year that requires big social sites to take reasonable steps to ensure their users are not under the age of 16. Let's start with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese addressing the press on this law this week.
This is indeed a proud day to be Australian, because make no mistake, this reform will change lives for Australian kids and allowing them to just have their childhood, for Australian parents enabling them to have greater peace of mind, but also for the global community who are looking at Australia and saying, well, if Australia can do it, why can't we? This will make an enormous difference. It is one of the biggest social and cultural changes that our nation has faced. It's a profound reform which will continue to reverberate around the world in coming months to assist not just this generation, but generations to come.
Kim, what do you make of this as an effort to protect teens, preteens, I guess, from social media and the internet?
Okay, as a mom of three, I am all for this. Sign me up. Bring the Australian Revolution home. Because, look, we know that this is products that are harming children. They are causing mental health issues, depression, eating disorders, anxiety. It has exacerbated other childhood menaces, bullying, and social ostracization. And that's before you get to some of the corrupting messages that are coming through to the kids and the lost opportunity that accompanies screen time. I mean, just one example, we have an obesity problem in this country, and including among too many of our young Americans, and kids sitting on phones instead of being outside riding bikes is not helping the situation. I would also note that we have regulated other kinds of things that we know harm kids on grounds that they either physically or mentally are not prepared for their use. We don't let them buy and drink alcohol or smoke tobacco or drive cars before a certain age or read pornography. It also, I think it would really help in a lot of family dynamics. It gives kids a reason not to do this. Putting it in the category of bad for you makes it different. A lot of kids right now are ostracized for not having social media. This changes the calculations. This makes it something where you're now not supposed to have. It helps parents who have been very frustrated by the lack of availability of tools to monitor what their kids are doing and to do it themselves. And I think, let's be honest, I think it would help educators as well, too. They partly inspired this by pushing more kids to have phones and to turn that into the main means of communication with parents rather than them doing it. I think they're now regretting it, and you're seeing that in all of these bans for phones, school, etc. So I think it's a good move and something that American states should be thinking of themselves.
Colin, so far this restriction on age of users applies to 10 platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Snapchat, Threads, TikTok, Twitch, X, YouTube. It seems like to some degree, it's still kind of an experiment. So it requires reasonable steps for these platforms to do age checks on their users. But the law specifically prohibits platforms from requiring the showing of a government-issued ID. So showing an ID could be one way to prove age, but the social platforms cannot mandate that. So there are using other ways of trying to get at that problem, including, I guess, like facial analysis. Here's a picture of the user on the webcam. How old does the program think that person looks? I don't know how fuzzy those lines are, how accurate those programs can be, telling a 15-year-old from a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, but presumably they can tell a 40 or a 50-year-old from a 15-year-old. And also similarly questions about how much circumvention there will be, whether teens will, use VPNs, virtual private networks, which allow internet users to, channel and act as if they are in a different place. On the other hand, to Kim's point, I mean, we have laws, minimum drinking age laws in the United States, and that does not mean that there is no one under the age of 21 who has ever had a sip of wine or a beer. But we still find those laws useful to keep on the books and enforce as well as they can be enforced.
Yes and no, right? I mean, I certainly agree with everything that Kim said. I mean, this is an enormous problem. I'm a mom of four myself. I mean, I am battling this every day. I think every parent is battling it every day. And I think really my biggest problem here is with any ban that it's going to be really tricky to enforce it. I mean, by today, there were already news stories about the Australian teens who were kicked off social media, yesterday, and have already found ways to work around it. They're using parents or older friends to get around the age detection technology. And as all of us know, whatever we can think up to try to keep our kids off certain areas of their phones, they're already better at it. They can just circumnavigate it. So I think it's going to be very difficult to police. There's also the issue, of course, that, as you mentioned, that because this ban named specific social media companies like Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, those are obviously the big ones, other companies can just crop up and fill the void instantly. I mean, if those are the really the ones that are being targeted, I don't know what you do about that. As for the drinking age comparison, I appreciate the point that it's still better to have a marker or a law against it, even if enforcement isn't 100%. And I take Kim's point that, then that kids can recognize that, this is actually something that's bad. And it's not just that their parents are saying it's bad, but that it's just a bad thing or something that's illegal. But I think the issue with social media, frankly, is different because it's so constant and pervasive. I mean, if you think about alcohol, kids that are planning to sneak a 6-pack of beer on a Friday night are planning all week for their big transgression. And they're figuring out how they're going to get the beer and whose basement they're going to drink it in. And the actual time spent drinking the beer is relatively modest, right? This is something entirely different. I mean, this is constant evasion of the law because once a child manages to get themselves somehow cleared through onto one of the social media apps, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, by using a fake profile, once they get through, they're in. I mean, they're going to be back to their old ways of checking, in on their friends every hour that they're awake. So I think the analogy to drinking laws, I'm not sure fully holds here.
But it is, Kim, I think a new era maybe of trying to have voters take control to some degree over what these platforms are allowed to offer their kids and others on the internet. And it's, the Australian authorities are saying even themselves that we're going to see how this works. And in several months, we're going to report back to the public about how many accounts have been deactivated and so forth. And, laboratories of democracy, we normally think about those as the U.S. states kind of doing their own things. By the way, Florida has enacted a similar kind of ban on some social media for kids, I believe, under the age of 15, so 14-year-olds. That has been challenged in court. But if there is demand for this, voter demand for this, it seems like there is going to be a political response to it. And notably, Rahm Emanuel, considered a probable 2020 Democratic candidate for president, is already out there endorsing bringing this kind of Australian law to the United States. And notably, he did it on Instagram. Listen to this.
Today, Australia is banning all TikTok, Instagram, and all social media from kids that are 16 and younger. I think it's time for America to pick up its game and do the same. Look, when it comes to our adolescents, it's either going to be adults or the algorithms. One of them is going to raise the kids. And I think we need to help parents. It's too much for a parent to push against Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the other social, Snapchat, all the other social medias apps. Our kids are way too vulnerable. It's too addictive, too alluring, that a parent should face off against these powerful companies that are trying to influence their children. Now, when it came to taking telephones out of classrooms, we've seen progress. When it came to restricting tobacco from our kids, we've seen progress. When it came to the designated driver, we've seen progress in protecting the safety and the development of our children. So today I'm calling for the United States to follow suit, come up with its own plan, but protect our children, help our parents, strengthen our families, and restrict all the social media when it comes to access to kids and adolescents 16 and younger.
Kim, what do you think about the politics here? Is Rahm taking a kind of canny angle and maybe looking at the polling of parents and voters on this question?
Well, can I just say first that I love the detail with which Colin recounted the plotting and planning of getting beer and having it in a basement. It sounds like someone who knows, and now I'm going to contemplate Colin's misspent youth. But look, I think
Or painful motherhood.
Rahm Emanuel, I think this is a very savvy move on his part, because this is a bipartisan issue. This crosscuts across Republicans, Democrats, Independents. If you're a parent, and life is tough right now. And I think this time, if you're an educator, and even people who don't have kids are looking around and seeing some of the, I think, immense social problems that are accompanying entire generations that are growing up in an environment in which there have been no rules about this. And this is why I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic than Colin on a couple fronts. I get the point that kids are sneaky. They're better at this than us. My kids are certainly better at this than I am. But I do have a little bit of kind of hope in the notion that as technology does improve, and as people try out these experiments, there may be some improvement in the way that they're actually monitored and managed. Look, Australia is the first one to do this, and it's probably going to be a little bit messy because the tech industry hasn't really ever been asked to do this before. And you're seeing a variety of different proposals for how they do. That's one interesting aspect of the Aussie law, is that it's holding them to a certain account, but not prescribing how they have to do it. And so you're seeing a lot of variations. You were talking about ID scans and selfies. There are some that are attempting to do bank linking. There are some that are beginning to going to try to use AI inference to look at online behavior to get a sense of, if you've got a bunch of kids that are just continuously asking and putting in queries and searching up stuff and watching things that are very much what a 14-year-old boy would be looking at, maybe AI flags that, and you can do a little bit more investigation. But here's what I think is most important about this, is that it's signaling, and this is like to Rahm Emanuel's point in a way, it is signaling to the tech industry that the free-for-all is over. Because let's be clear here, they have operated since the advent of social media with really no rules. They love all the users. They love all the usage. I understand there's also a liability here, and I think we need to think carefully about that and make sure that we don't turn the tech industry into a new piggy bank for trial lawyers. We don't do that to alcohol companies, et cetera. Like, we need to make sure that the burden for those who are breaking the law is on those who break the law. But they have not done anything so minimal to assist parents in any way because they don't want to. And now you're beginning to have Washington, D.C. have this debate. State legislators have this debate. Other countries, obviously, having this debate. And it is a little warning shot to them that if they don't begin to clean up their own act in some way, that there are going to be laws, and they might be far more aggressive than if the tech industry had simply been a little bit more amenable to working to protecting kids' health. And we know, by the way, I think Mark Zuckerberg doesn't let his own kids use social media. He knows what the problem is. But they have not been willing to cut back on it and offer tools because they prefer to have the user base.
On that point, Colin, it does seem to me like there has been a vibe shift recently. And I was reflecting the other day that it's been a pretty amazing 20 years. 20 years ago, the iPhone did not exist. Facebook was a new kind of website, a social media site, but it was for college kids. There was a time when you were supposed to sign up using a university.edu email address. And that is just miles and miles away from the ubiquitous nature of smartphones and social media now to us. And by the way, it seems like social media even is kind of a misnomer now. I mean, there was a day when I would open one of these sites and what I would see was my real life friends and things that they are doing and photos of them. And TikTok, the success of TikTok and this short form video and other platforms' desire to keep up with it seem to have changed that. Now I open a lot of these sites and I see stuff from creators, people I don't know, 30-second clips of stuff, a lot of stuff that may or may not be AI generated, may or may not be marked, even if it is AI generated. And so it does seem like there's it kind of been a 2-decade long experiment in letting this stuff grow on its own. A free for all was the term that Kim used. And then lately, just a real effort by the voters, parents to say, we're going to draw some hard lines. I mean, the swiftness, it seems to me, with which one state said, we're going to ban cell phones in all public schools during the school day from bell to bell. And then other states said, that seems like a pretty bright idea. We're going to do that too. It's just interesting the efforts it seems like there's kind of a growing consensus that this has gone too far and there need to be some limits placed on it. And I would agree with Kim. It's not clear to me how all of that stuff is going to shake out. And maybe some of these methods will work. Maybe some of them won't. I often wonder why, having carriers, phone carriers and app stores take on some of this burden might not be an easier way to go about it rather than doing facial analysis of photographs, webcam shots of users. Somebody who has the phone plan on that phone has a credit card attached to it and knows who that person is.
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, I definitely take the point about the free for all. And don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that I'm actually against the effort to try to get some sort of element of control on these things. And I'm glad Australia is trying what they're trying. I just think, as Kim said, that it's going to take time before we actually have the kind of technology to keep the kids off the technology. I think facial recognition will probably be a part of that. But, I also think that in the interim, we need to recognize there are things that social media companies do that are particularly problematic. An obvious one is on Snapchat, where kids get snap streaks with their friends. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but they have this thing where if you've snapped a certain person every day for a year, then it's a snap streak and nobody wants to break it. And it's like winning an award or something. I've seen my kids go to extreme lengths to protect snap streaks, even on days or when I've taken their phones away for several days on a vacation or something, they'll ask if they can just briefly manage their snap streaks so they don't lose that count. That's really bad. That's incentivizing addictive behavior. It's horrendous. And I think what schools are doing is an incredibly important piece of this puzzle. I think honestly, one of the major problems that we have in the US with teenagers and their phones is the prevalence of this technology in schools. There's just honestly no way to get around it. You can be a super Luddite parent and keep your kids on flip phones until high school and police their social media use and everything else, but you're still going to run up against the same phenomenon, which is that at a certain age, kids simply have to have their devices in order to get their schoolwork done. And everything in class is coming through their devices. And some of it's on their phones and some of it's on their computers. And they're doing all this work there. So it's not just writing papers. It's the research and it's, notably the group projects. How often do kids get on, onto their social media to work on school projects? So I think that schools need to be really thoughtful about this. I think a bell-to-bell policy in high schools is a great start. Letting kids have their phones in the hallway between classes as they do now, I think really harms their social interactions. Even if they're able to be focused with professors in class, they're losing those crucial hours of not staring at their screens and actually interacting with people in the hallway as they're supposed to also be learning some social skills.
Kim, we'll give you the last word, but in addition to the questions, the practicality and enforcement questions that we are going to be very interested to see how they play out in Australia. It seems to me a couple of additional wrinkles for any politician, Rahm Emanuel or others, who want to bring this kind of model to the United States. One of them, of course, is the First Amendment. The law, the Constitution, the Supreme Court is very protective of speech. And so there will be some questions. Maybe this Florida case will get up to the justices about how those rights differ if you are talking about minors. Minors' access to non-obscene speech on the internet, Facebook friends, Snapchat photos, and so forth. I'm not sure exactly how the justices would handle that. I do think that some of their approaches to the internet have evolved over some of the, over the past 20 years as the internet has evolved. Some suggestions in opinions from, the early internet era that there was a high bar for banning and restricting content because filtering was an option. The Supreme Court has recently suggested maybe filtering. Now we have enough evidence that that doesn't work very well. And so the legal question is one. And then second is also the political context is different. Part of what Australia has done here is give a bunch of power to a e-safety commissioner, which is going to, help enforce this law, work with social media companies, investigate. And if you created a bill in the United States and said, we're going to set up an office of e-safety commissioner and give that regulator a bunch of authority to decide which of these social sites are taking reasonable measures and which of them are not taking reasonable measures, you might have a revolt on at least one side of the aisle in Congress, Kim.
Yeah, so it might be worthwhile just briefly explaining what this Florida law is and the very quick judicial handling of it. So Florida's ban bans anybody under the age of 14 from having social media accounts on platforms that deploy, quote, addictive features, kind of like what Colin was talking about. And so the state has argued that the law does not prohibit the use of social media in total, but just apps that have addictive features like infinite scrolling or push notifications constantly or personal interactive metrics, which I'm pretty sure is what a snap streak is, where you're trying to keep those metrics high, or autoplay videos and live streaming, things like this. And so the industry sued. A judge put an injunction on its enforcement. The 11th Circuit recently lifted that injunction while the case goes on. And so that restriction on kids under the age of 14 is going into effect in Florida at this point. And it may well find its way up to the Supreme Court, since Florida is the first to engage in something like this. I think there are some very unique questions surrounding this in the United States, given our Constitution and First Amendment protections. We do have, as you noted from the early days, some rulings on the books already that would suggest that it would be very hard to regulate even kids' speech when it comes to some of these issues. But the Supreme Court, I think, has been stepping back and realizing that dealing with these things on a case-by-case basis are sometimes very difficult because the technology is changing so fast. And that gets to questions of principle. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting about Australia's ban is it's content neutral, meaning it's not designed to actually say, this kind of speech is bad, this kind of speech is okay. It's simply saying, social media, if it's classified as social media, and I guess there is a discretion there, if it's classified as social media, then it's an age restriction. It's a simple age restriction. And this is a little bit different approach than, for instance, what Europe's been trying to do, or sort of saying like, you can't have this kind of content and you can't have that kind of content if it's going to be in front of an audience that includes kids, because that really does put the regulators in the middle of all kinds of complicated questions. Look, I think that there's going to be a lot of litigation on this, and the Supreme Court is going to have to make some big decisions here. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of am a little bit more in favor of some of this experimentation at a state level to see what works. You're right. I cannot imagine a sort of e-regulator flying in Washington very well. I understand why they're doing it in Australia. It's actually works very well with their law in that it's going to make a kind of decision about what raises to the level of being banned. And since, as Colin noted, you could have a new company that comes in and fills the void. Having that e-regulator allows them to add that company to the list. So now you can't have that's not an alternative on social media. I get it. But the very notion, especially given recent censorship problems out of Washington, D.C., it's probably not going to fly. And that's why there might instead be a better model of 50 states and different approaches, which are allowed to go their own way, but with the Supreme Court deciding some basic ground rules for what counts some free speech and not.
Thank you, Kim and Colin. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.